You guys ever had a plant that looked something like this and you found yourself thinking, should I just throw it away? I mean, it's pretty much dead anyway, right? Do not throw that plant away. This plant can make a full recovery. And you want to know how I know? Because of this gal right here. But before I tell you her story, I want to talk about some of the things that can make us think that a plant is dead when it might not actually be dead. And I want to start off with talking about plants that go dormant, or just dormancy in general. Typically in your house, unless you're keeping it really cold in the winter or something, your plants are not going to know that it's winter inside, and you don't necessarily see a full dormancy stage or even a full dieback stage like you do outside with perennials, where after the first frost outside, they're going to die back to the ground and they're going to look completely dead until this time of year when spring's kicking in, and they're going to start to push back up out of the ground. You're really not going to see that necessarily in your house. It can happen though, it's pretty rare, but it can happen. But if you do have that happen in your house, definitely you don't want to throw that plant away. So my rule of thumb is if a plant dies back in my house in the winter, I'm gonna back off my watering and I'm just not gonna fuss too much over it, and I'm gonna wait and see what happens when spring comes around, because sometimes they will shock you and they will start to push out new growth. But another thing we need to talk about is deciduous plants that go dormant and completely stop growing in the winter. So I'm going to show you this guy I've got down here. This is my Plumeria. So if you're familiar with Plumerias, you know that these Plumerias have these nice long green leaves. They produce these wonderful, beautiful, fabulous smelling flowers. And this particular variety of Plumeria is deciduous. So in the winter, it will lose all of its leaves. It will go dormant and it will look like this, like just twigs. I like to call it twigs right now. That's its nickname for the winter, until probably a few weeks from now is when it's going to start to push out some new growth. Now, here's a perfect example. I brought this plant inside as soon as it got cold this winter, and it still lost all its leaves and went dormant. There you go. Perfect example right here. Like I said, not common, but can happen. But I'm not throwing it away because I know it's going to come back. And with plants like this, you guys, let me try and get him a little bit closer up here so you can see that this is a very woody, barky looking stem. When you have plants like this, a real good way for you to check and make sure it's still alive is to just use your fingernail, and you're just gonna scratch off a little bit of bark. And if it is green under there, that plant's good to go. It's gonna make a comeback. So don't throw it away. You're gonna hear me say this a lot in this video today. Don't throw it away. That is the theme of today's video. Let me set this guy back aside. So another common plant where you'll see potentially just stop of new growth in the winter. Actually, lots of times with these plants, I also see a lot of leaf loss in the winter, and it can die all the way back to the soil, even in your house in the winter, and that is Alocasias. So I have my Alocasia Tiny Dancer here, and I love this plant. Let me see if I can get the camera to focus on these leaves. These are these little cute cup-shaped leaves that kind of dance around on these long thin stems, and there's a little baby leaf coming in right here. It's the first one it's gotten since the winter, and it did lose quite a few leaves in the winter. So that's another example where this could very well have died down in the soil, and I would have just let it sit, and then right around now it probably would have started to push back up new growth out of the soil. And part of the reason is because this is a tuber-based plant. So there's a big tuber under the soil in there, and tuber-based plants have a big tendency to do that. They can die all the way back, and then the tuber is still alive and healthy, and it will push out new growth. Another good example of that, which I do not own one myself, is the Oxalis triangularis, otherwise known as false shamrock, or most people just call them shamrocks. I can tell you, okay, so I don't own one myself, but I'm laughing because it's not mine, but I grew up around it, and it's my mother's. She has one of these, and she has had it since before I was born. I am 40 years old, you guys, and that plant is still kicking. And she forgets to water it from time to time. I have watched it die all the way back. You would have thought, a lot of people would have thought that it was just totally dead. All the stems collapsed, all the leaves fell off. And then a couple months later, that thing is like bushier and full and like a brand new plant again. I am almost like, it's one of those plants where I am almost convinced that you cannot kill it. Those shamrocks, they're pretty hard to kill. So that's another good example of a tuber-based plant where sure, it could happen. Don't throw it away. Once again, gonna hear that phrase a lot today. Sorry guys, it's just what the video is about, and I really want to encourage you not to assume that a plant is dead because they will surprise you. Vining plants, that is another one I want to talk about. Vining plants, especially like a Syngonium. I know a lot of people have had problems with Syngoniums and they die back to the soil and people just trash them because they think it's dead, and it's not. Syngoniums is a big one where you can actually cut it back to the soil. I've seen people do it just because of like pest problems or something, because sometimes, well, here, I have my Syngonium logo here, and part of the reason I have her here again instead of my only other Syngonium I have in my collection right now is because of pests. I am still not convinced I've gotten rid of the thrips on that plant, and she is in my office, which has doors, and so the thrips and her are staying in there until I'm sure the thrips are gone, because I don't want them anywhere else in my house. I had never had them before her, and no, no more thrips. So we're gonna be showing the logo again today. You can see I love this plant, it's so cute. And a lot of Syngoniums, you might not think it's vining, because a lot of people, I like to keep mine bushy like this, trimming them back to this bushy look, but you can let them just keep growing and they can trail over. They are a vining plant and they can be cut all the way back to the soil and still be alive and start to pump out new growth. But you might think, oh, it's dead, I'm gonna throw it away. Don't throw it away. Other vining plants too, like your Philodendrons, your Monsteras, you know, think about how you propagate those plants. We can cut each of those nodes off and not even have a leaf on it, just have the node, stick it in soil, and it will root and start to push out new growth. So it makes sense, if you can propagate it with no leaves on it, that you could cut all the leaves back and it would still be able to continue to then develop new growth and push it out of that soil. So definitely, what? Don't throw that plant away. Tradscantia is another one. So I only have one indoor Tradscantia, that's why she's the only one you ever get to see. But as I've mentioned before, my most prolific growing houseplant right here, and I do have purple heart Tradscantia planted in my backyard, and it dies down after that first frost. It dies down to the ground, it does nothing, and then right about now, probably here in the next week or so, it'll start to push back up. So far, the only thing that started pushing up out back for me right now are my canna lilies. They're just now starting to show, so that means the rest of the things around them, including the purple heart Tradscantia, should be starting to push up soon. Once it does, it's gonna take off like wildfire. They are just such prolific growers, and they can, as houseplants, start to get like bald on top and have just leaf issues, especially if they're not getting enough light. And sometimes in that situation, you could, just to get it cleaned up, get it fuller on top, go cut it off. Just cut it back to the soil and it will still continue to then push out new growth. So this is another one where if it dies back to the soil, just back off the watering, don't throw it away. Give it some time, especially if it's in the winter, wait till spring and see what happens. I'm gonna set her back aside. So before we move on, another thing that you can do, like I talked about scratching the bark on your more woody stemmed plants. Another thing you can do on plants that are not like that is you can actually check their roots. Just take them out of their pot, look at their roots. If the roots are brown and mushy, like you've got a root rot situation going on, if they're totally gone because you did have a root rot situation going on, you didn't catch it, then okay, that plant probably not gonna make it. But even if it looks like it's just slightly been underwatered, and I will link my underwater video up here and down in the description below so that you can go check out what to do if it looks like it's been slightly underwatered to help encourage it to bounce back. But if it looks that way, don't just throw it away. And that brings me back to this guy. So this guy was featured in that video, and that is what happened. This plant had been severely underwatered when I bought it, and I tried to bring it back, and we kept dropping leaves. But then, let's see if we can get it to focus again. Then this little leaf has been hanging on for now 9 months. It's not perfect, but it's green. Stem is green. This plant, something about this plant is alive. And we're moving into spring, so I'm gonna wait. I'm going to wait, and I'm going to see what happens. And you know, maybe it will die. Maybe eventually this one falls off and that's it, the plant's done. I don't know. But right now, something's still happening here. So I'm gonna keep it. And another reason I'm gonna keep it is because of this plant I showed you at the beginning. Before I get to that point though, these are all Calatheas, members of the prayer plant family. And I know for a fact that, especially with Calatheas, if they die back to the bottom of the soil, they can come back. And before I forget, in case you're like, what kind of Calathea was this? This is what it should look like. It is a rattlesnake Calathea, Calathea lancifolia. Now it's a Gopertia insignis, I think is the new classification, but beautiful, beautiful plant. And I have faith that it can bounce back and come back to this, because this gal did exactly that. This is my white fusion Calathea, and I'm gonna flash up on screen for you what she looked like when I first got her. So she's still not back, in my opinion, to as full as she was when I first got her. But what happened was spider mites. I hate spider mites. I'm trying not to go off on mid-video rants like I do, you guys. It's kind of like apparently my thing I'm figuring out as I'm going back and watching my videos. Just know I hate spider mites. They're the bane of my existence, and unfortunately she got them. We'll save the rant for a pest video. But I treated her with neem oil and it was going fine. We did once a week for 3 weeks treatments. Fine, no problems whatsoever. But then on the 4th treatment, and I questioned if I needed to do it, but I was just like, okay, just in case, I'm gonna give her one more treatment. And it was the bottom of the jug of neem oil. And I think what happened was the dredges in the bottom were more concentrated with that oil than it was like, you know, when it was new. Probably wasn't shaking it up enough at some point to get it, you know, fully combined. So the bottom dredges had a higher concentration of oil. Because after I sprayed her down, the next day I went in there and she felt like sticky to the touch. It was bad. Her pot was sticky. I was like, oh my God. I tried to wash her off actually with soap and water, and that wasn't even cutting through it. And then one by one, the leaves started turning yellow and dying. And as they were turning yellow and dying, I was cutting them off to try to encourage the other growth not to die, but it didn't work. So here's kind of the progression up here of what happened. And you can see we started losing more and more leaves, having to cut back more and more leaves. And we ended up with, I think, at the very end, when I stopped having to cut off leaves that were dying, I think maybe we had 3 leaves left, maybe, if. Everything else I had cut back off to the soil, and then we sat that way for a while, and I didn't want to throw her away. That would have been my first ever houseplant that I had killed, lost, whatever, and I was panicking. And so I think part of the reason I just kind of backed off my watering and kind of let her be was because I just didn't want to either A, admit defeat, or B, I was in denial about it, and I was like, okay, maybe she'll make a bounce back and come back. And guess what? She did. So it took a while, and I kid you not, you guys, I went 2 months without watering her because she didn't have any foliage to do anything with. So it was taking forever for the soil to dry out. And then when it would get really quite dry, I would water her again. And we went on this way for a matter of months. And then I just was moving her to clean in the bathroom one day, and I noticed a new leaf starting to stick up out of the soil and unfurl. And I turned into like the biggest like baby talk / cheerleader plant mom ever. Like, oh my God, look at you go with your cute little leaf. You can do this. I mean, this went on this way for weeks. Seriously, I was just so happy that she was putting out new growth. And one by one, more leaves started popping up. Then across on the other side of the pot, another cluster of leaves started popping up, and now we look like this. I absolutely adore this plant. And yeah, I cannot even tell you how happy I am. And like I said, this is not quite as full as what she looked like when I first got her, but her nursery pot that she's in inside of this pot, I think it's about 7.5 inches in diameter, maybe. That's a pretty big comeback, you guys, from what I showed you about how many leaves that we got down to. And it took time. It took months and months and months. And right now that we've moved into spring, I mean, there's so many new leaves coming out of here. I can't even. There's so many, it's just, they're all over the place. So yeah, totally glad I didn't throw this plant away. And that's why you shouldn't throw your plants away either. Give your plant the benefit of the doubt and see what happens. Honestly, see what happens. You can have these plants die back to the soil. You can cut a lot of these plants back to the soil, and they will come back. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you have, please be sure to hit that like button for me down below. And if you have had any plants that, especially if they're ones that I didn't bring up today, that you've had this experience with where they've either died back on their own or you've had to cut them back because something happened and you thought maybe they were dead and then they made a miraculous comeback, comment down below and let us know. Side note, you guys, just in case some of you who've watched my videos in the kitchen before are thinking things look a little bit different, like, isn't that door usually over here? Yeah, that's because I got an actual camera and I'm not using my iPhone anymore because I was using the front camera on my iPhone, which was set to mirror mode. So that's why things might look a little bit different to you right now. You're not crazy. It's just my camera changed, but I think this camera is producing much, much, much better quality for you guys. And I got a new mic up here, which hopefully is making that sound quality much, much better for you too. Comment below and let me know what you think. Once again, if you are not following me on Instagram or Facebook, at Aloha Plant Life is where you need to go. And if you have not yet hit that subscribe button down below, please do so, you guys. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Aloha!